No one believed he would survive. A baby elephant standing alone on three legs in the African wild. No herd, no protection, no way back. In nature, that doesn't mean maybe. It means certain death. Even the most experienced people said the same thing. You can't save them all. But sometimes, a life doesn't need a miracle. It just needs someone who refuses to walk away. And that single decision changed everything. The Okavango Delta woke slowly, wrapped in pale mist and the low hum of insects rising with the sun. Tall reeds swayed in the breeze, and shallow water reflected the sky like broken glass. For most people, this hour felt peaceful. For Mike Carter, it was simply the start of another patrol, another day making sure nothing unexpected had gone wrong. Mike moved carefully along the dirt track in an aging ranger truck, eyes scanning the ground more than the horizon. Years ago, back in Arizona, he had learned to read smoke the way others read clouds. Now he read broken grass, disturbed mud, and silence where there should have been sound. The instincts never left. They only changed uniforms. He hadn't always planned to stay in Africa. After 15 years as a firefighter, Mike had grown tired of arriving too late, of standing in the ashes of homes and telling people there was nothing left to save. Conservation felt different. Out here, if you caught trouble early enough, sometimes you could still change the ending. The radio crackled softly with routine chatter from other patrols. Crop raids had been quiet this week. No reports of injured animals. No signs of poaching activity overnight. Everything suggested an uneventful morning, and Mike almost allowed himself to relax as the truck rolled closer to a muddy floodplain near the edge of the delta. Then he noticed the tracks. They were wrong, too chaotic, deep grooves where something heavy had dragged itself through wet earth. Mike slowed the truck, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled sharp and metallic, beneath the sweetness of wet grass. His hand hovered near the radio as his eyes followed the marks toward a patch of tall reeds ahead. At first, he saw only movement, a slow sway, something tall and gray shifting against the green. When the shape came fully into view, Mike stopped breathing. A young elephant stood alone in the open, sides heaving, its body trembling as if struggling to remember how to stay upright. Elephants were never alone. Not the young ones. Not here. Mike took a step closer and felt his chest tighten. The elephant's back leg was gone below the joint, the wound dark and caked with mud. It leaned awkwardly, balancing on three legs that were already shaking under its weight. One ear hung low, torn at the edge, and its eyes were wide with exhaustion and fear. He scanned the horizon quickly, expecting to see a herd charging back for their calf. There was nothing. No adults, no distant shapes, only the flat expanse of water and grass, and the unsettling quiet that follows violence. Mike's firefighter instincts screamed the same warning they always had. This scene was still dangerous. A laugh echoed somewhere beyond the reeds. High-pitched, hungry hyenas. Mike reached for the radio and called it in, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his throat. He described the location, the injury, the animal's condition. As he spoke, the elephant shifted its weight and nearly collapsed, catching itself at the last second with a low, strained rumble. He stayed where he was, not moving closer, not backing away. He spoke softly, words without meaning, the same way he once talked to trapped victims in burning buildings. He didn't know if the elephant understood him, but he needed it to know it wasn't completely alone. The wind changed, carrying the scent of predators and damp earth. The sun climbed higher, and with it came heat and urgency. Mike watched the young elephant stand there on three legs, fighting gravity and pain with nothing but instinct. He had seen that fight before, in people, in animals, in himself. As backup raced toward him from miles away, Mike made a quiet promise he wasn't sure he could keep. This one wouldn't be left behind. Not today. Not if there was any way, at all, to stop the story from ending right here. The light thinned into late afternoon gold, and the delta cooled in slow, uneasy breaths. Mike kept his distance, parking the old Ranger truck at an angle to block the reeds. He wasn't thinking about heroics. He was thinking about night, how darkness gave predators courage, and how one wrong move could turn a rescue into a quiet funeral for everyone. The three-legged calf swayed in the mud as if the ground was still shifting beneath him. Every few minutes he lifted his trunk and tasted the wind, searching for a familiar scent that never returned. No low rumbles from a herd. No gray silhouettes on the horizon. Just open water, tall grass, and a silence that felt louder than any siren call out here. Mike checked the sky, then the radio, then the calf again, caught in the same loop. Back in Arizona, he used to measure time by flame behavior and roof heat. Out here, time was measured by shadows stretching, and by the way hyena laughter grew bolder. He asked for an ETA, and the reply came clipped. Flooded tracks, maybe 40 minutes, if the road held. Movement flickered at the edge of the reeds, low and quick, then vanished. Mike didn't need a clear view to know what it meant. Predators didn't rush strength. They studied weakness. He rolled the truck forward a few yards, engine growling as a warning, then killed it again before the calf could panic. The smell of wet grass carried something metallic underneath. The calf startled anyway, taking one awkward step, then freezing with his ears flared wide. Mike felt that familiar firefighter's dread, like hearing a wall creak before it collapses. If the calf bolted, he could slip, break. Another leg, drown in the channels, or draw in the pack. Mike stayed still and spoke softly. Words meant more for calm than for meaning. At last, engines answered in the distance, growing louder, fading, then returning as they found the track. Two vehicles bounced into view, headlights off to avoid spooking the animal. Chief Ranger Tebogo Dlamini stepped out first, tall and controlled, eyes scanning the reeds before he looked at the calf. His calm didn't feel cold. It felt practiced. Tebogo studied the churned mud and the drag marks, then said what everyone was thinking. "If he goes down out here, we can't lift him," he murmured. "If he runs, he could hit the water, or run straight into them." He didn't point, but his gaze landed on the reeds like a warning sign. In Mike's chest, urgency tightened into a hard knot he couldn't loosen. The second truck brought Dr. Emily Ross, a field veterinarian with dust on her boots and a medical kit that looked insultingly small for an elephant. She approached slowly, hands open, voice low. When she saw the missing limb and the ragged wound line, her jaw clenched, then softened into something like grief. Professional, but unmistakably human. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Emily didn't touch the calf at first. She watched the breathing, the tremor in the shoulders, the way 3 legs did the work of 4. "He's crashing," she said, almost under her breath. "Severely dehydrated. Shock. Infections already moving." She finally met Mike's eyes. "He won't last the night. Not like this." The words landed heavy and final. No one spoke after that. Tebogo asked the hard question without raising his voice. "And if we sedate him here?" Emily's answer came just as steady. "We could lose him faster," she admitted. "But if we do nothing, we lose him anyway." The wind shifted again, and the distant laughter sharpened. Mike felt both of them pulling on him. Safety on one side, a chance on the other. Either way, time was running. They argued in short, careful sentences, like volume might invite the wild closer. Tebogo worried about the team, about a panicked calf, about a road back to camp turning to soup after dark. Emily worried about blood poisoning and collapse. Mike listened, then looked at the calf, who stood trembling like a candle, refusing to go out in a drafty room. As the sun slipped behind the reeds, the calf made his choice. He took 2 shaky steps toward Mike's truck, not charging, seeking. The trust in that desperate movement hit Mike harder than any shouted plea ever had. Emily exhaled, then nodded. "We do it here," she said. "Slow dose, minimal stress. The second he's down, we move. No hesitation." Mike swallowed and nodded. The dart struck with a soft thump. The calf flinched, confused, then fought the sedative with stubborn life, knees trembling as if he could argue his way back to standing. Mike had seen men fight. Oxygen masks in smoke, terrified of surrender. When the calf finally sank into the mud with a long sigh, the delta went strangely quiet, and for one thin moment, everyone breathed. The night swallowed the delta quickly, turning water into black glass and grass into moving shadows. The calf lay sedated, chest rising in shallow, uneven rhythms. Mike stood near the truck, flashlight lowered, afraid that too much light might pull danger closer. The calm felt fragile, like something borrowed rather than earned. They worked fast, but carefully, muscles tense, voices low. Emily checked vitals again and again, adjusting fluids while watching the calf's breathing. Every calculation mattered. Too little support, and he would crash. Too much, and his heart might not handle it. Mike recognized the rhythm immediately. Controlled urgency, the kind that left no room for doubt. As they lifted the calf onto the transport sled, the smell of infection became unmistakable. It clung to the air, sharp and wrong. Emily didn't hide it from Mike. "This isn't just a wound," she said quietly. "It's been spreading for days." Mike nodded, though his stomach sank. He had hoped the worst damage was already behind them. The convoy moved slowly through the dark, tires sliding in mud, engines kept low. Mike drove lead, eyes locked on the narrow track ahead. Each jolt sent a ripple of fear through him. He imagined bones shifting, blood pressure dropping, a silent ending happening in the back while he focused on the road. When the lights of the Kalahari Wildlife Rehabilitation Center finally appeared, relief came sharp and brief. They carried the calf into the treatment bay under harsh, white lamps that made every injury impossible to ignore. Mud washed away to reveal torn tissue, swelling, and a wound line that looked angrier with every passing minute. Emily's face hardened as she examined the leg more closely. The damage was worse than expected. Infection had eaten deep, tunneling toward the joint. She straightened slowly, wiping her hands on a cloth that was already stained dark. "We can't save the leg," she said. The words were calm. Their weight was not. Mike felt the sentence land before he fully understood it. He had pulled people from burning homes, knowing some things couldn't be fixed, only survived. This felt the same, but bigger somehow. An elephant without a leg wasn't just injured. It was rewritten. "If we don't?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Emily didn't hesitate. "Then we lose him," she said. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon." She explained it clinically. Infection, sepsis, organ failure. But Mike heard something else underneath it. Finality. Tobogo stood nearby, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the floor as if staring at the truth might change it. They argued briefly, not about the facts, but about responsibility. Was it right to save a life, only to condemn it to something unknown? Tobogo, worried about suffering, about a future filled with pain. Emily worried about the certainty of death if they did nothing. Mike listened, then looked at the calf's face, young, unscarred by anything but chance. The decision came quietly, without ceremony. Emily began preparing the surgical team. Tobogo stepped outside, radioing updates to headquarters with a steady voice that betrayed nothing. Mike stayed where he was, watching the calf's chest rise and fall, feeling the same helpless focus he once felt watching flames eat through a roof he couldn't stop. The surgery lasted hours. Mike didn't watch the procedure itself. He paced the corridor, counting steps, replaying the day in his head as if there had been a moment he could have changed the outcome. He remembered the calf taking those steps toward the truck, choosing help without understanding the cost. Just before dawn, Emily emerged, exhaustion lining her face. "He's alive," she said simply. The infection was contained, the bleeding controlled, the leg was gone. Mike exhaled, for what felt like the first time all night. Alive sounded like victory, until the rest of the sentence arrived in his thoughts. As the sky lightened outside, Mike stood alone by the window. Somewhere inside the building, a three-legged elephant slept, suspended between survival and whatever came next. Mike had saved lives before, but this one felt unfinished. He wondered quietly whether survival would be enough this time, or whether they had only delayed a different kind of ending. Morning arrived without celebration. The calf survived the night, but the air inside the center felt heavier than before. Mike watched from the doorway as the young elephant lay on thick bedding, breathing steady but shallow. The space where a leg should have been was wrapped and clean, almost too clean, like something missing from a photograph. They named him Buddy later that day. It wasn't official, just something Mike said without thinking, a soft word that made the room feel less clinical. Emily smiled faintly when she heard it, then turned back to her charts. Names helped people cope. Sometimes they helped animals too, or at least Mike hoped they did. In the days that followed, Buddy stabilized physically, but something else began to slip. When he tried to stand, his body tilted at an unnatural angle, 3 legs straining to do the work of 4. Each attempt ended with a frustrated rumble and a slow collapse back into the bedding. Mike felt a familiar ache watching it, the kind that came when effort wasn't enough. Emily adjusted pain management and hydration, working within limits that felt unfair. Too much medication dulled Buddy's awareness. Too little left him restless and hurting. There was no perfect balance, only careful compromise. Mike recognized the pattern from burn recovery wards, where survival often came with a long, uneven road behind it. Other rescued elephants passed nearby, their movements easy, almost careless by comparison. One younger calf wandered close, reaching out with its trunk, curious and unafraid. Buddy shifted away, ears folding inward, retreating to the far edge of his space. The rejection wasn't aggression. It was withdrawal. Mike felt it like a bruise. At night, the center quieted, but Buddy rarely slept deeply. He shifted, tested the ground, tried to rise again and again. Each failed attempt carved something invisible out of him. Mike stayed late, sitting just outside the enclosure, listening to the soft sounds of breathing and bedding. He remembered sitting in hospital hallways years ago, doing the same thing. Tobogo visited often, his presence steady but reserved. He watched Buddy's struggles with a practiced eye, weighing outcomes. "Living like this," he said one evening, voice low, "may be harder than dying." It wasn't cruel, it was honest. Mike didn't argue, but the words stayed with him long after Tobogo left. Emily shared similar concerns, though she framed them differently. "His body will adapt," she said, then paused. "Or it won't." The curve in Buddy's spine was already beginning, subtle but unmistakable. Pressure shifted where it shouldn't. Pain traveled. Time, which had saved him once, was now working against him. Mike found himself talking to Buddy more, not because he expected understanding, but because silence felt wrong. He spoke about fires he couldn't stop, about people who survived with scars that never faded. Buddy listened, or maybe he didn't. But sometimes, when Mike spoke, Buddy's trunk stilled, and that felt like something. Weeks passed, and the early relief of survival faded into a quieter tension. Visitors avoided the enclosure, sensing something unresolved. The staff moved carefully, as if afraid to name the truth forming between them. Buddy was alive, but he was shrinking inward, retreating from a world that no longer made sense to his body. One afternoon, as Mike watched Buddy struggle to stand yet again, he realized what unsettled him most. This wasn't an emergency anymore. There were no sirens, no flames, no single moment demanding action. This was a slow problem, the kind that didn't scream for help. And those, Mike knew, were often the hardest to save. As the sun dipped low, Buddy finally settled, exhausted. Mike rested his hand against the fence, feeling the cool metal under his palm. Survival had brought them here, but it hadn't brought answers. Not yet. And somewhere beneath the weight of uncertainty, Mike felt the quiet fear that this story might still end the way everyone expected. Ava Nguyen arrived without ceremony, stepping out of a dusty rental truck with a backpack slung over one shoulder and curiosity written all over her face. Mike noticed her hands first, steady, deliberate, marked by small scars that spoke of machines rather than animals. She didn't rush toward Buddy. She stood back, watching, as if listening to a question no one else could hear. She wasn't part of the veterinary staff, and she didn't pretend to be. Ava introduced herself simply, explaining that she worked in medical robotics back in California, designing assistive devices for people who had lost limbs. A friend had sent her a message about a three-legged elephant in Botswana, and something about it wouldn't let her sleep. Mike had heard promises before. Donors, consultants, well-meaning visitors who came with hope and left with photos. Ava felt different, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way she asked questions instead of offering solutions. Or the way she watched Buddy's movements, eyes following the subtle shifts of weight and balance. Emily was polite, but cautious. "We've stabilized him," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But elephants aren't people, and this isn't a front leg." Ava nodded, as if she'd expected resistance. "I know," she replied. "That's why I wanted to see him move. Not just the injury, the pattern." That word lingered in the air. They watched Buddy attempt to stand. 3 legs pushed, strained, compensated. His spine curved slightly as he adjusted, instinctively redistributing weight in a way that bought seconds, not comfort. Ava crouched, sketching in a notebook, her pencil moving fast. "He's solving a problem every second," she murmured. "It's just too much for his body." Tobogo joined them later, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He listened as Ava explained the idea, carefully, without drama. Not a miracle, not a guarantee. A mechanical support designed to share load, to reduce strain, to give Buddy a chance to relearn balance before his body broke itself trying. "A prosthetic," she said finally, knowing the word would land hard. It did. Tobogo shook his head almost immediately. "African elephants grow fast," he said. "They're strong. They don't tolerate restraint." He spoke of danger, of stress, of a wounded animal turning unpredictable. "If this fails," he added, "we risk more suffering. And for what?" The question wasn't rhetorical. Ava didn't argue. She acknowledged every risk, every unknown. Then she said something that shifted the room. "Everyone's asking if this will work," she said quietly. "No one's asking what happens if we do nothing." The silence that followed felt heavier than disagreement. Mike felt it settle in his chest, like a truth he'd been avoiding. That night, Mike walked the perimeter with Ava, listening as she talked through possibilities. Materials, modular designs, gradual conditioning. She spoke of failure as part of the process, not the end of it. Mike thought of fires he'd entered knowing the roof might fall, because standing outside guaranteed loss. Some risks were chosen, others chose you. Emily joined them later, exhaustion softening her skepticism. She admitted what she hadn't wanted to say out loud. "We're running out of options," she said. "Pain management can only do so much. His body won't forgive us forever." Ava met her gaze, steady and calm. "Then let's not waste the time we have," she said. They didn't decide that night. No papers were signed, no announcements made, but something shifted. The conversation moved from whether to try to how, from impossibility to planning. Mike watched Buddy sleep from the doorway, his massive body rising and falling in uneven rhythm, and felt a cautious, unfamiliar spark of hope. The next morning, Ava brought a lightweight mock component into the enclosure. Nothing functional, just a shape, an idea made physical. Buddy stirred, lifted his trunk, and reached out. He touched it once, then again, curious rather than afraid. Ava froze, barely breathing. Mike felt his throat tighten. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a beginning. But it was the first moment Buddy had chosen to engage with something new instead of retreating from it. Mike recognized that moment instantly. It was the same look he'd seen in survivors when they decided quietly to keep going. And for the first time since the surgery, the future didn't feel entirely closed. Progress did not arrive gently. It came in uneven waves, followed by long stretches where nothing seemed to move at all. Ava set up a temporary workspace near the enclosure, sketches taped to walls, materials laid out like quiet promises. Buddy watched from a distance, interest flickering and fading, unsure whether curiosity was worth the effort. The first real fitting attempt was never meant to be dramatic. It was supposed to be brief, controlled, almost boring. Ava adjusted the temporary support while Emily monitored Buddy's breathing and heart rate. Mike stood back, hands clenched, feeling the same tension he once felt before a controlled burn that could still get away from you. Buddy tolerated the device for less than a minute. Then his body stiffened. He shifted his weight wrong, slipped, and went down hard into the bedding with a deep, panicked sound that cut through everyone in the room. Dust rose. Equipment clattered. For a split second, chaos replaced careful planning. Emily rushed in, checking for injury, her voice firm but urgent. Buddy struggled, confused and frightened, trunk swinging as instinct took over. Mike froze, knowing one wrong movement could escalate everything. Ava backed away slowly, hands raised, her face pale. The moment felt like a breaking point no one had prepared for. They stopped the session immediately. No arguments, no reassurances, just silence and controlled breathing until Buddy calmed, then collapsed into exhausted stillness. The device was removed and set aside, suddenly looking less like hope and more like a mistake. Outside, the wind rattled the fence, restless and impatient. That night, Ava sat alone in her workspace, staring at designs she no longer trusted. Mike found her there. Hours later, lights dim, sketches crumpled. She didn't look up when he spoke. "I pushed too fast," she said. It wasn't guilt so much as responsibility weighing her down. Emily was blunt the next morning. "We can't scare him like that again," she said. "Stress alone could kill him." Tobogo nodded in agreement, the unspoken option hanging in the air. Stop now. Accept limits. Let nature or time decide the rest. Mike felt the old fear return, the fear of quitting because continuing hurt too much. But something about Buddy had changed. When Ava returned to the enclosure without equipment, Buddy didn't retreat. He watched her, ears relaxed, trunk moving slowly, as if considering her presence. The fear from the fall hadn't erased curiosity. It had complicated it. Ava noticed, and so did Mike. They changed everything after that. No more fittings, no pressure, just exposure. Ava brought materials into Buddy's space and left them there, letting him approach on his own terms. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. Each interaction was treated like progress, no matter how small. Emily shifted her focus to comfort and routine, giving Buddy consistency instead of goals. Mike spent more time nearby, sitting, talking, doing nothing. He remembered learning that people recovering from trauma didn't need motivation. They needed safety. Buddy was no different. Weeks passed without visible improvement, and doubt crept back in. Funding questions surfaced, schedules tightened. Tobogo warned they couldn't hold this limbo forever. Ava listened, nodded, and kept working. She redesigned quietly, building something gentler, something that invited trust instead of demanding performance. Then one morning, without prompting, Buddy stepped toward the new device Ava had placed near the fence. He touched it with his trunk, pushed it slightly, then rested his weight against it, just for a second. No panic, no struggle. Ava covered her mouth, afraid to breathe. It wasn't success. It was something smaller, more fragile. But Mike felt it all the same. A shift, barely visible, like a fire changing direction before anyone else notices. They had almost broken everything by rushing. Now, moving slower than anyone wanted, they were finally moving forward. The change was subtle at first, easy to miss if you weren't watching every day. Buddy began standing longer without trembling, leaning into the support as if testing an idea rather than an object. Ava never rushed him. She adjusted angles, softened edges, and waited. Mike learned to measure progress not in steps, but in seconds of calm. Training sessions became quiet rituals instead of events. No crowds, no expectations, just Buddy, the device, and space to decide. Emily monitored from a distance, recording vitals, ready to step in, but careful not to interrupt the fragile trust forming in front of her. Even Tobogo watched, without comment, arms folded, judgment paused. Weeks passed, And Buddy took his first real step with assistance. It wasn't clean or confident. His body hesitated, then committed, weight shifting with visible effort. When the step landed, the room stayed silent. No cheering, no movement, as if sound itself might undo what had just happened. Mike felt his chest tighten in a way he recognized from long ago, the moment when a trapped person found a pocket of air and realized survival was possible. Buddy froze, ears wide, then slowly relaxed. The device held. Nothing broke, nothing hurt. Ava exhaled, hands shaking despite herself. From there, progress came unevenly. Some days, Buddy refused to engage, retreating into stillness. Other days, he surprised everyone, taking 2 steps, then 3. Ava adjusted the design constantly, learning from Buddy's movements more than her calculations. The device wasn't teaching him to walk, he was teaching it to follow. Emily noticed the changes first in Buddy's posture. The curve in his spine eased slightly. Pressure shifted more evenly. Pain signals softened. His appetite improved. These were small victories, clinical ones, but they mattered. They meant his body was no longer fighting itself at every moment. Then came the morning no one planned for. The air was cool, the ground firm after a dry night. Buddy stood, supported but alert, ears relaxed. A sound startled him. Nothing threatening, just unfamiliar. Instead of freezing, he moved. 1 step, then another, then momentum carried him forward. He didn't walk so much as glide into motion, awkward and unbalanced, but undeniably moving. The support flexed, absorbed, responded. Buddy let out a low rumble that sounded almost like surprise. Mike's vision blurred as he realized what he was seeing. This wasn't practice, this was instinct returning. Buddy broke into a short run, 3 strides, maybe 4, before slowing himself, confused but unharmed. Dust rose. The moment ended as quickly as it began. Ava sank to the ground, laughing and crying at once. Emily covered her mouth, disbelief written across her face. No one spoke. Mike turned away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the sudden rush of feeling. He had waited years to see someone outrun their fate. He didn't expect it to come on 4 legs, one of them artificial, in the middle of the African bush. Buddy stood there afterward, breathing hard, trunk lifted, as if waiting for the world to correct him. When it didn't, something shifted in his expression. He wasn't cured, he wasn't fixed, but he was no longer confined to the ground beneath him. They didn't repeat the run that day. They didn't need to. The proof was already there. Word spread quietly through the center, then beyond it. Everyone who had said it couldn't be done had been speaking from experience. Buddy was speaking from something else entirely. As the sun climbed higher, Buddy wandered back to his resting place, tired but calm. Mike watched him settle, feeling the strange peace that comes after a fire finally goes out. Against expectation, against probability, against every careful warning. They had been wrong. And for the first time, the ending felt open. Time did what it always did. It moved forward, whether anyone was ready or not. Buddy grew. Slowly at first, then faster, his frame stretching, muscles thickening, curiosity returning in ways that felt almost ordinary. The prosthetic changed with him, rebuilt piece by piece, never finished, always catching up to the life it supported. The center adapted too. What began as an improvised workspace turned into a permanent lab, quiet and busy, filled with notes, tools, and lessons learned the hard way. Ava stayed longer than planned. Emily trained new staff. Even Tobogo softened, allowing cautious optimism where certainty had once ruled. Buddy learned the rhythms of his days. Morning walks, playful tests of strength, long rests beneath the shade where other elephants gathered without hesitation. He wasn't treated as fragile. He wasn't watched constantly. And in that freedom, he became something more than a case study. He became himself again. Visitors came, then reporters, then researchers. Mike avoided the attention, staying close to the edges, watching Buddy instead. He noticed how Buddy sometimes angled his body toward cameras, how his trunk lingered near the prosthetic as if aware it told a story people needed to see. It wasn't pride, it was presence. There were setbacks. Growth spurts brought soreness. New designs failed. Some days Buddy favored the old habits, leaning too hard, moving too fast. But failure no longer meant collapse. It meant adjustment. The fear that once followed every mistake faded into something steadier. Confidence earned slowly, honestly. Mike often thought about the night they found Buddy in the mud, about how close the story had come to ending before it ever began. Back then, survival had felt like a fragile thread. Now it felt woven into something stronger, something that held even when pulled. Children from nearby villages visited the center, listening wide-eyed as staff explained how Buddy walked. They didn't ask if he was broken. They asked how he learned. Mike liked that. It sounded like the right question. Buddy, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention, gentle and patient, in ways that surprised everyone. As years passed, Buddy's size demanded more space, more strength, more innovation. Each new prosthetic carried lessons from the last, shaped by trial, failure, and trust. What once seemed impossible became protocol. Not routine, but repeatable. That mattered more than anyone admitted out loud. One evening, Mike stood at the edge of the enclosure, watching Buddy move with the others as the sky burned orange and purple. The rhythm of hooves, the low communication, the calm order of it all. Buddy belonged there, not because he was fixed, but because no one had given up when it was easier to walk away. Mike realized then why this story stayed with him. It wasn't about technology or bravery. It was about refusal, refusing to accept the first ending offered, refusing to confuse probability with destiny, refusing to leave a life behind just because it looked different than expected. Everyone had said the three-legged baby elephant would die. They said it with experience, logic, and caution. They weren't cruel. They were realistic. And still, they were wrong. As night settled over the delta, Buddy lifted his trunk and let out a low, steady rumble that carried across the water. Mike listened, hands resting on the fence, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Some stories don't end the way they're supposed to, and sometimes that's exactly the point. If this story moved you, even just a little, let us know. You don't need to write anything long. Just type 1 in the comments if you believe Buddy deserved a second chance. Or type 0 if you think nature should never be meshed with. We read every comment, and your voice matters more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more true stories like this, stories about resilience, second chances, and lives that refuse to give up, please consider subscribing. There are many more stories waiting, and we'd be honored to share them with you. Thank you for staying until the end.